Weekends and Comfortable Shoes. Prologue. The first thing Elena noticed was her scarf. It hung over the back of the kitchen chair exactly where she'd left it that morning, one end almost touching the floor. Gray wool, a loose thread near the fringe she kept meaning to cut off. For a second, that was all her brain gave her, the scarf. Not the voices, not the strange stillness in the apartment, not the fact that she was home 3 hours early because the storm had knocked the power out at the insurance office and everyone had been sent home before lunch, just the scarf. Elena locked the apartment door quietly behind her, more out of habit than intention. Her tote bag slipped from her shoulder, heavy with paperwork and groceries she hadn't had time to unpack that morning. The apartment smelled faintly like coffee and laundry detergent. Home, or what had been home for 11 years. She bent to slip off her wet shoes near the door and stopped. There was another pair beside the mat. Men's boots. Ryan's. A small warmth moved through her automatically before she could stop it. Maybe he'd surprised her. Maybe Maddie had invited him over for coffee while she was at work. Ryan came by often now. Sometimes Elena would come out of the shower and find the two of them arguing over movies in the kitchen or laughing at something on TV while half a pizza sat open between them. Seeing them together had always made something in her chest loosen. The two people she loved most, getting along so naturally, had felt like proof that maybe life was finally becoming kinder. Then she heard the laugh, soft, muffled, too close to the bedroom. Elena straightened slowly. Another sound followed, a man's voice this time, lower, impossible to make out through the wall. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. The apartment suddenly felt warmer than before. No, she thought immediately. No. Her mind still tried to shape it into something harmless. Ryan was probably helping Maddie move furniture around. Maybe they were watching something in her room. Maybe... A quieter sound interrupted the thought. Not words. The kind of sound people made when they forgot no one else was supposed to hear them. Elena started walking before she realized she'd moved. One step, then another. The hallway light buzzed faintly overhead, flickering once. She'd reported it to the landlord weeks ago. He still hadn't fixed it. Somewhere outside, rain rattled softly against the windows. The bedroom door was half open. She could see the edge of the comforter first, then a bare shoulder, a hand against skin. Maddie's hand. Everything inside Elena went completely still, not shattered, not screaming, just stopped, like a clock losing power. Ryan turned first. The color drained from his face instantly. Elena. Maddie looked up, hair tangled, eyes wide, not guilty, just startled. Elena's fingers loosened from the strap of her bag. Folders spilled across the hallway floor with a flat, heavy sound. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For one strange second, Elena noticed her sweater folded neatly on the desk chair. She'd folded it carefully before work that morning. The room blurred slightly around the edges. All she could really see was her sister sitting in Elena's bed, the same girl whose lunches she used to pack before sunrise, the same girl she walked to elementary school holding by the hand, the same girl who still called her whenever something went wrong. Maddie? 11 years earlier. The hospital room smelled like bleach and overheated air. Elena sat beside her mother's bed with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched in nearly an hour. It had gone cold long ago, but she kept holding it anyway. The warmth had disappeared slowly enough that she hadn't noticed when it happened. Maddie slept curled up across two plastic chairs by the window, one sneaker hanging halfway off her foot. Their mother watched them both quietly. She looked smaller every day now. Not weaker, exactly. Smaller, like illness had been slowly erasing pieces of her from the edges inward. "Elena?" Her mother's voice had become thin over the past few weeks, but Elena still straightened immediately when she heard it. "Yeah? Come closer." Elena leaned forward beside the bed. Her mother reached for her hand. Even that movement seemed to cost effort. "You take care of your sister." Elena swallowed hard. "Mom, you promise me." The words came sharper this time, not emotional, serious, like something practical that needed to be settled before morning. Elena glanced toward Maddie, sleeping by the window, 8 years old, too skinny, curly hair everywhere, one arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she still carried, even though kids at school had started teasing her for it. "She has nobody else," her mother whispered. "You do," Elena said quickly. "You're going to be home in a few days. The doctor literally said—" "Elena." Something in her eyes stopped her. Not fear, acceptance. And suddenly, Elena understood something terrible before anyone had said it aloud. Her mother squeezed her hand weakly. "You make sure she finishes school." "I will. You make sure she has a better life than this." "You too," Elena said, almost angrily. "You'll be there." But her mother just kept looking at her, waiting. Elena felt tears burning already, hot and humiliating. "I promise," she whispered finally. Only then did her mother close her eyes again, as if that was the last unfinished thing keeping her awake. The funeral happened 3 days later under freezing rain. Elena remembered almost none of it afterward. People hugged her. Someone from church pressed a casserole dish into her hands. An aunt she barely knew kept saying, "You're the woman of the house now," like that was supposed to mean something helpful. Maddie cried only once. That scared Elena more than anything else. At home that night, Maddie sat cross-legged on the couch, still wearing her black funeral dress, eating dry cereal from the box because neither of them remembered dinner. "Are we going to move?" Maddie asked suddenly. Elena looked up from the stack of unpaid bills spread across the coffee table. "What? We don't have parents now. We still have each other. Mom always paid for everything." Elena looked at the bills again. Electric, rent, hospital payments, numbers everywhere. She was 19 years old. 19. A sophomore taking online classes and working part-time at a dentist's office. And suddenly every number in that apartment belonged to her. Elena forced herself to stand. "We're okay," she said, because somebody had to say it out loud first. "I'll figure it out." Maddie nodded immediately, like Elena had never failed at anything before. That trust felt heavier than fear. For the next few years, Elena's life became smaller and smaller. Not at once, quietly, one practical decision at a time. She switched to online classes completely because they were cheaper and easier around work schedules. Then she picked up extra hours at the insurance office downtown, then weekend shifts at a grocery store. Sleep became something she negotiated with instead of something she had. By 22, she could fall asleep sitting upright on buses. By 24, coffee barely worked anymore. But Maddie always had school supplies, always had winter boots that fit, always had birthday presents wrapped before Christmas paper went on clearance. Elena got good at stretching things: money, food, time,
herself. Some nights she came home so tired she sat on the edge of the bathtub still wearing her coat because standing long enough to shower felt impossible. Then Maddie would knock on the door. "Elle, you alive?" And Elena would force herself back up. "Yeah, give me 5 minutes." She never let Maddie see how scared she actually was. That became another habit, too. By the time Maddie turned 16, sacrifice had become invisible inside the apartment, like wallpaper, expected, normal. Elena woke up at 5 a.m. every morning without alarms now. Coffee started automatically before sunrise. Maddie usually wandered into the kitchen around 7, half asleep, stealing toast directly from Elena's plate before school. "You're going to be late," Elena would remind her. "I have time. You said that yesterday, and I still made it." Maddie grinned while pulling on her jacket. Young, bright, alive in ways Elena no longer remembered being. "You work tonight?" Elena asked while checking emails on her phone. "Yes." "And tomorrow?" "Probably." Maddie made a face dramatically. "You work too much." The irony almost made her laugh. Instead, she said, "Somebody has to pay for your future tuition." Maddie rolled her eyes dramatically. "You say that like I'm going to Harvard. You're not getting out of this city working retail." "That's offensive to retail workers." "You know what I mean." Maddie kissed Elena's cheek on her way out the door. "Love you." Then she disappeared into the hallway, smelling like expensive shampoo Elena definitely hadn't bought for herself. The apartment fell silent again. Elena stood alone in the kitchen, holding her coffee long after it stopped steaming.
Ryan entered her life 2 months before her 30th birthday. Not dramatically. No sparks. No movie moment. The insurance office switched internet providers, and Ryan showed up carrying cables and apologizing for the building's elevator being broken. "That thing's a lawsuit waiting to happen," he muttered while dragging equipment up 2 flights of stairs. Elena laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, small, but enough that Ryan looked up immediately. "There it is," he said. "What?" "The first sign you're actually human." She blinked at him. Ryan smiled easily. "You've looked mildly disappointed every time I've talked to you today." "I work customer service." "Fair point." He was younger than her. Not by much. 2 years, maybe. Warm brown eyes, rolled up sleeves. The kind of man who looked directly at people when they spoke, instead of halfway through them. Elena didn't think about him again afterward, at least not intentionally. Then he came back the next week because something with the installation had failed. Then again 2 weeks later. Eventually, he started timing his visits near her lunch break. "You always eat yogurt and almonds?" he asked one afternoon. "It's cheap." That is the saddest answer I've ever heard. It's still true. He started bringing extra food after that. Nothing aggressive, just little things. An extra coffee, half a sandwich he accidentally ordered too much of, a blueberry muffin left beside her keyboard without explanation. Elena kept trying not to enjoy it, which probably meant she already did. The first time Ryan asked her to dinner, she said no. The second time, she said she was busy. The third time, he leaned against her desk and said, "Okay, now I'm getting professionally concerned." She looked up despite herself. "You've rejected me enough times that I'm starting to wonder if you're secretly in witness protection." "I'm 30. Ryan blinked once. "Okay." "And I'm 27. "And?" "And eventually you'll realize women my age come with lower back pain and trust issues." Ryan laughed hard enough that 2 people turned around in the office. That wasn't even close to a no. Elena hated how warm her face suddenly felt. Dinner eventually became coffee. Coffee became occasional walks after work. Weeks passed before Ryan ever came near her apartment building,
Even then, he only walked her home because the buses were running late again and freezing rain had started coming sideways through downtown. At the entrance, Elena stopped awkwardly beneath the flickering security light. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. "Walking you home? Maybe I like 20 extra minutes." Elena looked at him for a second too long. That scared her a little. Maddie liked him immediately. That should have felt safe. Most days, seeing the two of them together made something inside Elena finally relax. The apartment felt warmer when Ryan was there, less quiet, less heavy. Other days, usually late at night when she couldn't sleep, Elena caught herself replaying how easily they laughed together and felt something colder move quietly beneath her ribs. Not jealousy, not suspicion, just the strange fear that happiness sometimes brought with it. Like life had finally handed her something gentle after years of taking things away, and she still didn't quite believe she was allowed to keep it.
Section 2. The Shape of Betrayal. For a while, Elena let herself believe life could still change. Not dramatically, not into something perfect, just softer. Ryan became part of her routine so gradually she barely noticed when it happened. A second coffee cup left drying beside the sink, his jacket over the kitchen chair, Maddie yelling from the couch, "Tell Ryan he has terrible taste in movies," before Elena had even opened the apartment door. Sometimes Ryan cooked dinner while Elena answered work emails at the table, mostly simple things. Pasta, stir-fry, frozen garlic bread burned slightly at the edges because he always forgot timers existed. "You know, smoke detectors are legally required for a reason, right?" Elena asked one night, waving a dish towel toward the oven. Ryan glanced over his shoulder calmly. "That's flavor. That's carbon." Maddie nearly choked laughing, and Elena laughed too. The sound startled her enough that she went quiet afterward. Ryan noticed. He noticed everything. That was part of the problem. The first time Elena told him about her mother, they were sitting inside his parked truck outside her building while rain crawled slowly across the windshield. "I don't think I ever really decided anything for myself after that," she admitted quietly. Ryan rested his arms against the steering wheel. "You were 19. I was old enough. You were a kid." Elena almost argued automatically, then stopped. Nobody had ever said that to her before. Not once. Not after the funeral, not after the bills, not after Maddie. A kid. The word settled somewhere deep inside her chest and stayed there. "She made me promise," Elena said eventually. Ryan nodded once. "And you kept it." "Yeah. Most people wouldn't have." Elena stared out through the rain. "She would have done the same for me." Ryan looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "And what happens when you finally get to live your life?" The question hit harder than she expected, because she didn't have an answer. The boundary conversation happened 3 weeks later. Ryan took her to dinner at a small Italian place near the river. Nothing fancy, paper napkins, candlelight trying too hard to make the room romantic. Elena barely touched her food. Ryan noticed that too. "You okay?" She set down her fork carefully. "There's something I should probably explain before this gets more serious." Ryan leaned back slightly, but stayed quiet. Elena suddenly wished she'd rehearsed this better. "My mom was traditional, I guess." Ryan waited. "I grew up believing some things mattered." "You're allowed to say sex," he said gently. Heat rushed instantly into her face. "I know." "Okay." Elena stared down at the tablecloth. "I don't sleep with people unless I'm married to them." The silence afterward lasted half a second too long. Not cruel, just surprised.
Ryan rubbed his jaw once. Is this a religious thing? Not exactly. Then what is it? Elena searched for words that wouldn't sound ridiculous out loud. It's hard to explain. Try. She exhaled slowly. I think when you spend your whole life watching people leave, you start wanting at least one thing to mean forever before you give yourself completely to it. Ryan looked at her quietly. No laughter, no disbelief, no irritation, just thought. Finally, he nodded once. Okay. Elena blinked. Okay? Yeah. That's it? Ryan smiled faintly. What did you expect? A PowerPoint presentation? Despite herself, she laughed. You're younger than me, she said softly. Eventually, you're going to realize this isn't realistic. Ryan's expression didn't change. Maybe realistic is overrated. For the first time in years, hope did something dangerous inside Elena. It opened its eyes. Winter turned slowly into spring. Maddie got accepted into the arts program at Portland State and cried hard enough Elena thought she might throw up from happiness. Ryan brought cheap champagne. Maddie climbed onto the kitchen counter in socks while yelling, I'm going to become one of those emotionally unstable famous artists. You already are emotionally unstable, Elena told her. Thank you for supporting women in the arts. Ryan laughed so hard he spilled champagne across the counter. The apartment felt alive that night. Warm, crowded, safe. At one point, Elena stood in the hallway watching the two of them argue about whether Die Hard counted as a Christmas movie while music played softly from someone's phone. And suddenly she had the terrifying thought, this is what a family feels like. The realization hit so hard she had to look away. 3 weeks before everything ended, Ryan started pulling away. Not obviously. Small things. He answered texts later, canceled dinner once because work ran late, stopped leaving random coffees on her desk. Elena noticed, but exhaustion had trained her to explain things away before questioning them. People got tired, people got stressed, life happened. Besides, Ryan still kissed her forehead before leaving, still held doors open, still texted goodnight. Sometimes she caught him watching her strangely, like he wanted to say something and couldn't figure out how. You okay? She asked one night. Ryan forced a smile too quickly. Yeah. She believed him because she wanted to. That was the worst part afterward. Not stupidity, trust. Later, Elena would realize those last few weeks hadn't been the beginning of him leaving. They'd only been the point where the guilt finally started showing through.
The day Elena came home early, the city disappeared beneath cold March rain. The office lost power around noon. By 1 o'clock, everyone had been sent home carrying half-finished paperwork and irritation. Elena stopped at the grocery store on the way back for soup, bread, and the coffee Maddie liked that cost too much for what it was. The cashier asked if she wanted a receipt. She almost said no. Later, she would remember saying yes. Tiny moments became strange after trauma. Her apartment building smelled faintly like wet concrete and cigarettes. Someone on the third floor was playing country music too loudly again. Elena climbed the stairs, balancing grocery bags against her hip, thinking about nothing. Soup, laundry. Maybe Ryan would come over later. Maybe. The scarf. Gray wool, hanging over the kitchen chair. Then the boots. Then the laugh. Then the bedroom. Afterward, Elena never fully remembered the next 10 minutes in order. Ryan pulling on clothes too fast. Maddie refusing to cry. The sound of rain hitting the windows. Someone saying her name repeatedly. It all floated strangely out of sequence, like memories dumped onto the floor instead of stored properly. Elena, please, just let me explain. Ryan's voice sounded desperate now.
She stared at him without speaking. Maddie sat at the edge of the bed, wrapped in Elena's blanket. That hurt more than it should have. Nobody seemed able to look directly at her for long. Finally, Elena heard herself ask very quietly, "How long?" Ryan closed his eyes briefly. Maddie answered first, "A few months." The honesty landed harder than excuses would have. Elena nodded once, like they'd confirmed something practical. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the city. Ryan stepped forward carefully. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Elena looked at him for the first time since entering the room. What was supposed to happen? Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Maddie stared down at her hands. "We didn't mean to hurt you." Something almost broke across Elena's face then. Not anger, something sadder. "You already did." Silence swallowed the room. Ryan ran both hands through his hair. "I tried, Elena." The word snapped something inside her attention. "Tried? I waited." Elena went completely still. Ryan looked exhausted suddenly, older. "I'm 27, he said quietly. "I want a real relationship. I want a future that actually moves forward." "And you thought sleeping with my sister was the solution?" "No." Ryan swallowed hard. "But pretending I was okay forever wasn't one either." Maddie finally looked up then. There were tears in her eyes now, which somehow made everything worse. "You make people feel guilty for wanting normal things," she whispered. The room tilted slightly. Elena stared at her. "What?" "You act like sacrificing yourself makes you better than everyone else." "I never—" "You don't have to say it," Maddie said quickly. "You just do." Elena felt the air leave her lungs slowly, not because the words were true, because Maddie had clearly been carrying them for a long time. Ryan moved toward the hallway carefully. "I think I should go." Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of that sentence. Maddie stood a second later. "I'm going with him." That finally made Elena blink. For one irrational moment, she honestly thought Maddie meant just for the night. Then Maddie reached for a duffel bag near the closet, already packed, already waiting. Elena looked at the bag, then at Maddie, then at Ryan. Something cold and hollow opened quietly inside her chest. Not shock anymore, understanding. You don't pack a bag for a mistake. Nobody spoke while Maddie gathered the last few things from the bathroom. Ryan tried once more before leaving. "Elena." She turned away before he could finish. A few minutes later, the apartment door closed, and just like that, the place became silent. Not ordinary silence, not peaceful silence, the kind that presses against your ears until you realize people are gone. Elena stood alone in the hallway for a long time. Rainwater still dripped slowly from the groceries she'd dropped near the door. The ice cream had started melting through the paper bag. Eventually, she bent down and picked up the receipt from the floor. Then she carried the groceries into the kitchen, because somebody still had to do it.
Section 3. The Neighbor Who Stayed. Elena went back to work 4 days later. Nobody told her she should. Nobody needed to. Rent still existed. Electric bills still arrived. The insurance office still opened at 8:30 every morning, whether people were heartbroken or not. So Elena put on makeup carefully enough to hide the bruised shadows under her eyes and returned to her desk like nothing important had happened. Her co-workers gave her the kind of cautious kindness people used around injured animals. "You feeling better?" Denise from accounting asked gently. Elena nodded automatically. "Yeah." It became easier not to elaborate. At lunch, she transferred Maddie's tuition payment from her savings account without letting herself think too hard about it. A minute later, the bank app showed the balance dropping again.
Elena locked her phone and went back to work. That night, Ryan transferred money to her with a short message attached. For Maddie's tuition. Nothing else. No apology, no explanation. Elena stared at the notification for nearly a full minute before sending the entire amount directly to Portland State. Then she blocked his number. Afterward, she sat alone in the apartment kitchen, eating dry cereal at 10:30 at night because she couldn't remember if she'd had dinner already. The silence inside the apartment no longer felt temporary. That was the worst adjustment. Not anger, not grief. Absence becoming structure. The new neighbor moved in 2 weeks later. Elena first noticed him because of the motorcycle parts. Crates stacked outside apartment 4B. Metal frames, tools. One afternoon, the entire hallway smelled faintly like gasoline and cedar wood. The landlord complained loudly about turning the building into a mechanic shop, but the guy only nodded once and kept carrying boxes upstairs. Elena barely looked at him the first few times they crossed paths. Tall, dark jacket, work boots, late 30s maybe. The kind of face people probably trusted automatically. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, he nearly hit her with his truck. Elena stepped into the crosswalk outside the building without looking up from her phone. Headlights swung sharply toward her. Brakes screeched. Jesus Christ! The truck stopped less than a foot away. A horn blasted somewhere behind it. Elena froze. The driver's door opened immediately. "What the hell are you doing?" the man snapped, striding toward her through the rain. "You trying to die?" Elena looked up slowly. Water dripped from her hood into her eyes. "I'm sorry." The anger on his face faltered, not because of the apology, because she didn't look scared, didn't look angry either, just tired, deep down tired, like getting hit by a truck might have only been another inconvenience in an already difficult week. Something in his expression shifted. "You okay?" he asked, quieter now. Elena nodded automatically. "Yeah." A lie, but apparently a convincing one. The man glanced at the grocery bag hanging from her wrist. One of the paper handles had torn halfway through from the rain. Without asking, he took it from her before it could rip completely. "I got it." "You don't have to." "Clearly I do." Despite herself, Elena almost smiled. Almost. The man noticed that, too. He held out his free hand. "Mason." "Elena." "You live in the building?" 3C. Mason gave a short nod. 4B. "Right. The motorcycle parts." That surprised a laugh off him. "Well, glad my reputation's solid already." The sound caught Elena off guard. Warm, easy, human. For one strange second, she realized she hadn't spoken to anyone casually in weeks. Not really. Mason owned a motorcycle restoration shop across the river. Elena learned that accidentally, mostly because he kept carrying impossible objects at absurd hours. Once, it was an entire exhaust pipe. Another time, a gas tank painted dark blue. One Saturday morning, Elena opened her apartment door to find Mason sitting cross-legged outside 4B, holding a wrench between his teeth while arguing quietly with a carburetor. He looked up. "Well, this is embarrassing," he said, around the wrench. "Is that supposed to be inside the motorcycle?" "Allegedly." A small sound escaped her before she could stop it. Not quite laughter. Close enough that Mason noticed. "You should probably do that more often," he said casually. Elena's expression closed immediately. Mason saw it happen in real time, like watching a door lock. He raised both hands slightly. "Sorry." "No, it's fine." But they both knew it wasn't. After that, he stopped pushing conversations. which, oddly enough, Elena made less nervous around him.
Their interactions became strangely routine. Mason carrying her groceries upstairs when the elevator broke again. Elena signing for packages delivered to 4B while he was at work. Occasional conversations near the mailboxes. Nothing important. Everything important. "You always work this late?" Mason asked one evening when she got home after 9. "Usually." "That sounds unhealthy." "So does rebuilding motorcycles in an apartment hallway." "Fair." Another night, he noticed the grocery store cake in her hands. "Birthday?" Elena adjusted the plastic container against her coat. "No, office retirement party tomorrow." "You bought your own cake for someone else's retirement party?" "It was cheaper this way." Mason stared at her for a second. "That might be the saddest thing I've heard all week." Elena blinked, then unexpectedly laughed. A real one this time. It disappeared quickly, but not before Mason smiled back. After that, something eased slightly between them. Not attraction, not yet. Just familiarity, the quiet kind. Mason had learned a long time ago that lonely people talked when they were ready. Pushing before that usually made them disappear. 3 months passed before Mason learned about Ryan, not from Elena, from the landlord. Walls in old apartment buildings carried sound almost as efficiently as gossip. "She got screwed over bad," Mr. Callahan muttered while replacing hallway light bulbs one afternoon. "Boyfriend ran off with the younger sister." Mason looked up sharply. "What? Hell of a thing, huh?" Mason said nothing after that, but later that evening, when he saw Elena struggling to carry laundry downstairs, something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. Not pity. He hated pity. Recognition, maybe. Because 4 years earlier, he'd stood in another apartment watching another woman pack boxes while explaining she needed more than a man who spent all day rebuilding engines. By the time he'd saved enough for a ring, she'd already fallen in love with someone else. After that, Mason stopped trying. Serious relationships felt dangerous. Casual ones felt empty. So he worked and let years pass quietly around him. Until a woman with exhausted eyes stepped in front of his truck and apologized for almost getting hit. The restaurant was downtown near the river. Elena only went because Denise from accounting refused to take no as an answer. "One dinner," Denise said while practically dragging her toward the entrance. "You've looked like a ghost for months." "I like being a ghost." "Too bad." The place glowed warm against the rain-dark street outside. Low lighting, wine glasses, expensive menus Elena checked prices on automatically before ordering anything. Halfway through Denise's story about office politics, Elena looked up and stopped breathing for a second. Ryan sat 3 tables away, Maddie beside him. Her hair was shorter now. Ryan's hand rested lightly over hers on the table. Flowers rested beside the wine glasses. Ryan shifted slightly, and Elena caught the brief flash of a small velvet box near his arm before looking away. Neither of them noticed her. Too late. The damage had already landed. "Elena?" Denise's voice sounded far away now. Across the restaurant, Maddie smiled at something Ryan said. Young, happy, in love. The sight hit Elena with 2 completely opposite emotions at once. Pain, and something dangerously close to relief. Because Maddie looked safe, taken care of, loved. Like the child Elena had spent 11 years trying to protect still existed somewhere inside the woman who betrayed her. Elena pushed back her chair too quickly. "I need air." She barely remembered walking outside. Rain misted softly across the sidewalk. Traffic lights blurred red and gold against wet pavement. Elena wrapped both arms around herself and kept walking. 1 block, then another. She didn't know where she was trying to go. Home, maybe? Anywhere else. By the time she reached her apartment building, her face and hair were damp from rain. Mason sat on the front steps drinking coffee from a paper cup. He looked up immediately when he saw her and stood. What happened? Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Mason stepped closer carefully, not touching her, just there. That almost made it worse. I saw them, she whispered finally. Understanding crossed his face instantly. Not curiosity, not surprise, just understanding. Mason looked at her for a long second, and he held out his truck keys. Come on. Elena frowned faintly. What? Get in the truck. Where are we going? Mason shrugged once. Away from here? Rainwater slid slowly down the side of the building beside them. Elena stared at the keys in his hand, at the quiet certainty in his expression. Then she heard herself say the thing she hadn't asked anyone in years. Take me somewhere. Mason nodded once. Okay. Then, after a brief glance at her shoes, but first, you're gonna need better boots. Section 4. Comfortable Shoes. Mason came back 20 minutes later with coffee, beef jerky, and a pair of hiking boots still in the box. Elena stared at them from the passenger seat. You bought me shoes? You own anything that isn't falling apart? She looked down at her wet sneakers. That's rude. That's a yes. Despite herself, a small smile tugged briefly at the corner of her mouth. Mason noticed, didn't mention it. Try them on. Elena hesitated. I'll pay you back. Sure. You say that like you don't believe me. I say that like I'm emotionally prepared to survive either outcome. That earned him a quiet huff of laughter. The sound warmed something unexpectedly deep in Mason's chest. He looked away before she noticed. They left the city after midnight. Rain followed them for nearly an hour before fading into mist along dark highway curves lined with pine trees. Elena rested her forehead lightly against the cold window. You always kidnap emotionally unstable women into the woods? She asked softly. Only on weekends. She snorted quietly, another sound he suspected she hadn't made much lately. The farther they drove, the quieter everything inside the truck became. Not awkward silence, tired silence, the kind that didn't demand performance. Around 2 in the morning, Mason pulled into a small campground near the water. Not official, just one of those half-hidden places people learned from friends and never posted online. Dark trees surrounded the clearing. Somewhere beyond them, Elena could hear water moving softly against rocks. Mason killed the engine. We're here. Elena blinked slowly. There's literally nothing here. Exactly. He climbed out before she could answer. Cold air rushed into the truck immediately. Elena followed more slowly, pulling Mason's oversized hoodie tighter around herself. The lake stretched black beneath the clouds. The silence felt enormous. Mason started unloading supplies from the truck bed with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Tent, cooler, firewood, lantern. Elena watched him for a minute. You do this a lot? Used to. What changed? Mason glanced briefly toward her. Life. That answer somehow told her enough not to push. The fire took 3 tries because the wood was damp. Mason swore under his breath the entire time. You know, Elena said from her folding chair, this survivalist mountain man image works better when the fire actually survives. Mason looked up slowly. Interesting opinion from someone who almost dies crossing parking lots. Elena stared at him, then laughed, actually laughed. The sound startled both of them. It came out rusty, uneven, real.
and once it started, she couldn't fully stop. Mason watched her across the firelight. God, he thought suddenly, there you are. The realization hit hard enough that he looked away immediately. Dangerous thought, very dangerous. They talked until nearly sunrise. Not deep conversations at first. Small things, movies, bad bosses, the strange emotional power hardware stores held over middle-aged men. At some point, Elena admitted she'd never gone camping before. Mason nearly dropped his coffee. You're kidding. We were poor. So was I. We didn't do outdoorsy poor. We did microwave dinner poor. That made him laugh hard enough to choke. Later, the conversations changed without either of them noticing exactly when. My mom hated motorcycles, Elena admitted quietly, while staring into the fire. Smart woman. She said only irresponsible men bought them. Mason placed one hand dramatically against his chest. That's hurtful. Elena smiled faintly. Then the smile faded again. She also thought people should wait until marriage. Mason stayed quiet, not because he didn't know about Ryan now, because he did. She wasn't obsessed with religion or anything, Elena said softly. It was more like she thought intimacy meant something permanent. And you believed her? Elena watched sparks drift upward into darkness. I don't know anymore. Mason leaned back slightly in his chair. You know what I think? What? I think people screw up permanency all the time. She looked over at him. Mason shrugged. Marriage, relationships, families, promises. People break things constantly. That's a depressing speech. Hang on, I'm getting somewhere. A tiny smile touched her mouth. Mason stared into the fire. But just because people break things doesn't mean wanting something real was stupid. The night went very still after that. Elena looked down at her hands. For months now, she'd felt ridiculous, outdated, embarrassing, like the whole world had quietly agreed she was naive before forgetting to tell her. But Mason said it so simply, without pity, without trying to fix her. Something inside her loosened slightly. Not healed, just loosened. They slept badly. The air turned colder before dawn, and Elena woke sometime around 5 to complete silence outside the tent. For one disoriented second, she forgot where she was. Then she heard movement nearby. Mason sat on a large rock near the water, wrapped in a flannel jacket, holding 2 cups of coffee. You're creepy, Elena muttered while walking toward him in oversized socks and borrowed boots. Mason handed her 1 cup. You snore. I absolutely do not. You kinda do. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. You're lying. Probably. Elena sat beside him. The lake reflected pale gray morning light now. Thin fog drifted slowly across the water. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Elena whispered, I saw a ring box. Mason didn't react visibly, but his grip tightened slightly around the coffee cup. At the restaurant? She nodded. He looked happy. Mason stared out over the lake. That must have been hard. Elena swallowed. The strange thing was she realized she hadn't wanted Ryan back, not really. That wasn't the pain. The pain was realizing someone else had become the center of Maddie's life so easily after Elena had built hers entirely around Maddie. I think I made her my whole world, Elena admitted quietly while staring into the fire. Mason stayed quiet, not because he didn't know about Ryan now, because he did. You know what my therapist once told me? You had a therapist? Court-ordered emotional growth, long story. Despite herself, Elena smiled. Mason continued watching the water. She said people drown when they build their entire lives around being needed. The words settled heavily between them, because Elena understood immediately. Every decision, every sacrifice, every year, needed. Who was she if nobody needed her anymore? As if hearing the thought, Mason glanced toward her. You know, you're allowed to exist for reasons other than taking care of people, right? Elena looked away too fast. The question hurt, not because it was cruel, because she genuinely didn't know the answer.
They stayed another day, then another night. Time softened strangely near the lake. Elena stopped checking her phone constantly, stopped thinking about work every 10 minutes, stopped listening for ghosts inside her own head. She and Mason argued over ridiculous things, whether pineapple belonged on pizza, whether coffee from gas stations counted as self-harm, whether raccoons looked cute or deeply criminal. He made her hike farther than she wanted. She complained loudly the entire time. "You're very bossy for someone whose survival skills include almost getting hit by traffic. And yet I'm still alive. Barely." At one point, Elena slipped slightly, crossing wet rocks near the shoreline. Mason caught her arm instantly. His hand closed around her wrist. Warm, steady. Both of them froze. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. Still too long. Mason released her carefully. "You okay?" Elena nodded, but something had changed now. Not dramatic, just noticeable, like a song shifting keys quietly in the background. They drove back Sunday evening beneath low gray clouds. The closer the city appeared, the tighter something became inside Elena's chest again. By the time Mason parked outside the apartment building, exhaustion had settled heavily over both of them. For a moment, neither moved. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. Elena stared forward. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mason nodded once. "You're welcome." She reached for the door handle, then stopped. Fear moved suddenly through her chest so sharply it almost felt physical. Not fear of Mason, fear of this, of needing something again, of trusting peace. Elena opened the truck door too quickly. "I should go." Mason looked at her for a second. He understood immediately. That somehow made it worse. "Okay," he said softly. No pressure, no guilt, no attempt to stop her. Elena climbed out into the rain without looking back. The next few weeks felt wrong. Not painful exactly. Worse, empty again. Mason didn't knock on her door, didn't text, didn't accidentally appear near the mailboxes. At first, Elena felt relieved, then restless, then irrationally angry. By the 4th day, she caught herself listening for his footsteps in the hallway. By the 6th, she realized she hadn't laughed once since the lake. That realization unsettled her more than it should have. On the 7th day, Elena opened her apartment door after work and found a small cardboard box outside. No note. Inside sat the hiking boots, cleaned, dry, along with the exact amount she'd tried transferring to Mason online 3 days earlier, refunded in cash. Elena stared at the money for a long moment, then at the boots. Something tight pulled unexpectedly in her chest. Not because of the shoes, because suddenly she understood something terrifying. She missed him. Not the distraction, not the trip. Him. That night she barely slept. The next morning, Mason knocked on her apartment door for the first time in over a week. "Elena?" Her pulse jumped so fast it annoyed her immediately. She opened the door too quickly. Mason stood there wearing a dark jacket, damp from rain. "You busy tonight?" Elena blinked. "What?" "There's an art exhibition downtown." Confusion crossed her face. "Okay." Mason glanced briefly toward the old exhibition postcard still tucked into the frame of Elena's hallway mirror. He'd noticed it weeks ago. "One of the featured students goes to Portland State." Everything inside Elena went still. Mason watched understanding slowly reach her eyes. "You knew," she whispered. "Yeah." A dozen reactions collided inside her chest at once. Shock, fear, anger, relief. Mason spoke before she could decide which emotion won. "You said you wanted closure." Elena stared at him. "I never said that."
No, Mason agreed quietly, but you've looked like someone standing in a doorway for weeks. The words landed harder than they should have because they were true. Mason stepped back slightly. If you don't want to go, we won't. Elena looked past him into the empty hallway, then back at him. You planned this? I hoped for it. Why? Mason held her gaze calmly. Because some people stay stuck so long they forget leaving is an option. The silence between them stretched softly. Then Elena heard herself ask, "Will you come with me?" Something warm flickered briefly across Mason's face. "Yeah," he said, "of course." The gallery smelled like wine, wet coats, and fresh paint. Students moved through the rooms, pretending not to watch whether people stopped near their work long enough. Elena barely noticed any of it. Her heartbeat had been too loud since the elevator ride up. Then she saw Maddie across the room, alive, real, not memory anymore. Maddie turned at almost the same moment and froze. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then Maddie whispered, "Elle?" The sound nearly broke something inside Elena's chest, not because it hurt, because it still sounded like home. Mason stood quietly beside her, not leading, not rescuing, just there. Elena realized suddenly that she could leave right now. Nothing trapped her anymore. Not promises, not guilt, not fear. She stayed anyway, and somehow that made all the difference. Mason looked at her for a long moment, then very quietly, so only she could hear, "Marry me." Elena turned toward him in shock. "What?" Mason's expression stayed calm, steady. "I'm serious." "In an art gallery?" "You seem busy emotionally. I'm adapting." A laugh escaped her unexpectedly, tearful, disbelieving, real. Mason stepped slightly closer. "You don't have to spend the rest of your life earning the right to be loved, Elena." The room blurred faintly around her. Elena looked at him and realized something quietly terrifying. At some point between the rain, the campfire, the stupid arguments about gas station coffee, and the silence beside the lake, life stopped feeling heavy around him. Not perfect, not healed, just possible again. Across the gallery, Maddie still stood frozen beside one of her paintings, waiting. Everything felt strangely suspended between one heartbeat and the next, and for the first time in 11 years, Elena heard herself choose something for herself first. Yes.
Epilogue. The first thing Elena noticed was the silence. Not the painful kind, not the empty kind that had once filled every corner of the apartment after Maddie left. This silence felt lived in, warm, safe. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while coffee brewed somewhere behind her. For a moment, Elena stayed still beneath the blankets, staring at the pale gray morning light spreading slowly across the ceiling. Then she heard Mason's voice from the other room. "You're pretending to be asleep, so I have to feed the dog, aren't you?" Elena smiled into the pillow. "There are literally no witnesses," she called back. "Coward!" A second later, the bedroom door opened. Mason leaned against the frame, holding 2 coffee mugs. His hair was still damp from the shower, one sleeve rolled halfway up like always. The dog, an elderly shepherd mix Mason had rescued 3 months earlier, wandered in behind him, carrying one of Elena's socks like stolen treasure. "Traitor!" Elena muttered at the dog. Mason handed her coffee carefully before sitting beside her. For a minute, neither spoke. Outside, Portland disappeared beneath another sheet of steady spring rain. Mason glanced toward her. "You nervous?" "A little. That's normal." Today was the gallery's spring fundraiser. Maddie would be there. It had been 4 months since the exhibition, 2 months since Elena signed her new last name with shaking hands at a courthouse downtown.
Things with Maddie still weren't fixed. Maybe they never fully would be. Some wounds healed crooked. But they talked now, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes carefully. Last month, Maddie had texted her a photo of a terrible frozen pizza with, "Ryan still burns garlic bread, BTW." Elena had stared at the message for nearly 5 full minutes before laughing hard enough to scare the dog. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't hatred anymore either, and maybe that mattered. Mason nudged her shoulder lightly. "You don't have to do anything today except show up." Elena looked down into her coffee. For most of her life, love had felt like obligation, like exhaustion, like constantly calculating what everyone else needed before asking herself the same question. Mason had never asked her to earn him. That still felt strange sometimes. Good strange. The dog jumped onto the bed between them with all the confidence of someone who paid no rent. Mason sighed dramatically. This relationship had room for exactly 2 individuals. She likes me more. She steals my socks. That's intimacy. Mason laughed quietly. And just like that, something inside Elena settled again. Not fireworks, not cinematic certainty, something better. Peace. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. A message from Maddie. "Running late. Don't start being emotionally mature without me." Elena stared at the screen, then handed the phone silently to Mason. He read it once and smiled. "Well," he said, "that sounds promising." Elena looked toward the rain-streaked windows, toward the apartment that no longer felt haunted, toward the man beside her, toward the life waiting outside the bedroom door. Then she took a slow sip of coffee and realized something almost unbelievable. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving her life anymore. She was finally living it.